This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. A former vice chairman of the Fed says while Wall Street is looking a lot better, Main Street is just slogging along, and he says a number of bankers belong in jail. The author of that Time magazine cover story on Marco Rubio tells us the Florida senator is a strong contender for the 2016 GOP presidential nomination because he is Romney with charisma. And Bill Press talks with two progressive members of the House, Keith Ellison and Peter Welch, about what the Paul Ryan budget would do unto others. Are you tired of Tea Party Republicans and Rush Limbaugh dominating the airwaves? Do you want the facts you won't get on Fox or even on CNN? Then stay tuned. Our sponsor, 21st Century Democrats, works hard to get everyday Democrats involved in returning our party to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Sit back and listen, then stand up and fight. And follow 21st Century Democrats on Facebook for all the latest progressive news. We're glad you can join us. Dr. Alan Blinder was a member of Bill Clinton's Council of Economic Advisors and, later, vice chairman of the Fed. That makes him an expert on the financial crisis. And he's written a book that explains why it happened. He also tells us some unnamed bankers ought to be in jail. And joining us now on americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. Alan Blinder is the Gordon S. Rensselaer Memorial Professor of Economics and Public Affairs at the Princeton Department of Economics and served both on President Clinton's Council of Economic Advisors and as vice chairman of the Federal Reserve Board of Governors. He is the author of a new book, After the Music Stopped, about the financial crisis of 2008 and beyond. Dr. Blinder, thanks so much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org.
Well, glad to be with you.
Now, your book, After the Music Stopped, tells the story of the housing bubble and the near collapse of Wall Street. How do things look today, and how do they look 10 years down the road, if you don't mind looking in that crystal ball of yours?
Well, 10 years down the road is a long way to look. Let me start with today.
Fair enough.
On the things that you mentioned, the housing bubble, of course, is long gone, and at long last, it's taken much too long. The housing market looks to be on a strong rebound. So we're still closer to the bottom than the top, but housing is looking far, far better at last. Wall Street, of course, is looking much better. It has gained back all that had been lost during the crisis, which was quite a lot. The economy, however, Main Street is kind of slogging along. We haven't been in recessionary conditions for a long time now, but the growth has been very, very inadequate. The unemployment rate is too high. Too many businesses are still struggling, and so on. So the condition of the U.S. economy isn't good. 10 years from now, I have no idea where the stock market will be, but I'm pretty confident the economy will be in a better place than it is now. Hopefully we don't have to wait for 10 years.
Right, yeah. I think we've probably waited long enough. Now, the two political parties seem unable to manage the economy in any rational way. Congress tried the super committee, and all it came up with led to sequestration. Is there some other way the argument over spending versus taxing can be removed from partisan politics? Can it be rephrased another way? I mean, what has to happen here?
I don't think it really can be removed from partisan politics, and I don't think we should be trying that. We have a congressional democracy, and things are supposed to be hashed out through the political process, and these decisions on spending and taxes and so on go to the heart of what our democracy is supposed to look like. So I don't view it as a proper aspiration to say let's remove this from partisan politics. What I'd like to see, and I think what America should be working towards, is a diminution of the stringent partisanship that we've been seeing in recent years, especially since 2010, but even before that. Now, it's not like we've never had this in our history. I think you could certainly argue that the Jefferson-Hamilton era was worse in terms of nastiness and partisanship than today is, but the post-war period until recently has been better. And I think almost all Washington observers say they've never seen it this bad. That creates, in my mind, at least a chance that we could make it better. Not nonpartisan, for sure, but a little bit more mellow than what we have today.
I think we would take mellow over just about anything right now. Looking back, could the Fed have stopped the irresponsible lending by the big banks before everything went to hell?
I think stopped is probably a little bit stronger verb, but diminished for sure. I mean, the Fed and other bank regulators were getting warnings of the shenanigans that were going on in mortgage lending for years and years. It was in the media. They were getting reporting on it in other ways as well, and they just didn't take action. It was one of my great frustrations while that was happening. What are they waiting for? What are they waiting for? You know, they finally took action in 2007. 2007. That's way, way too late. So my answer to your question is an unqualified yes. They wouldn't have stopped it all, but they could have made it better.
Okay. We're speaking with Dr. Alan Blinder, professor of economics and public affairs at the Princeton Department of Economics. Of course, he served on both President Clinton's Council of Economic Advisors and as vice chairman of the Federal Reserve Board of Governors. He's the author of the book, After the Music Stopped. Some people, including many conservatives, said, let the banks fail. Let people who took out mortgages they couldn't afford go homeless. Well, maybe there is some moral appeal to that idea for some. What would have happened had we let that all happen?
Well, you know, I think history has answered that question for us in at least two different epochs. First, those sentiments that you just echoed could have come out of Andrew Mellon's mouth when he was the Secretary of the Treasury for Herbert Hoover. In fact, he said words, those were not his words, but sentiments exactly like that. And unfortunately, Hoover took his advice too much, and we see what we got.
Right.
Second episode is the Lehman Brothers. The one prominent case in the recent financial crisis where we did follow that advice, let them fail, was Lehman Brothers. After the Fed and the Treasury gave up in getting a private sector solution, they basically just told Lehman, go ahead to bankruptcy court. There's nothing more we can do for you. And they did. And the aftermath of that was pretty messy. I don't think anybody wants to see that again.
At one point, you favored nationalizing banks. What kept that from happening?
That's actually not right. I mean, there was a debate over nationalizing banks, but I was on the side of don't nationalize them unless there's nothing else to do.
Oh, okay.
And instead we took there is something else to do, and in the much hated but highly successful bank bailout, what the government did is instead of nationalizing them, basically infused capital into the banks, largely by buying preferred stock, not common stock. So the government was not coming in and taking control of the banks, but was coming in as a largely passive investor to make sure that the banks didn't fold. And that worked. Now, had it failed, and by the way, I favored that approach, but had it failed, I would have gone over to the nationalizers' side. But I think it was unwise to go quickly for nationalization, and it turned out we didn't need it.
Do you think there are some bankers who ought to be in jail after all of this?
I don't have the slightest doubt about that. Now, I can't name them, and maybe they're not bankers. Some of them might be mortgage brokers and others, but some of them are probably bankers. But I can't believe that amidst all the frauds and near frauds that led up to this crisis, that the number of people that should go to jail over this can be counted on the fingers of one hand without using all five fingers. And that's what's happened to date.
Okay. Now, before we let you go, what is your opinion about the effect on the economy of raising the minimum wage? If it should be raised, by how much?
I think the evidence is by now overwhelming. It's been accumulating since the mid-'90s that modest increases, and the key word there is modest, I'll come back to it in a second, modest increases in the minimum wage do not have the deleterious effects that many critics say, in particular disemploying a lot of people because they get priced out of the market. Now, that's the word modest. If somebody would come along, and nobody is, saying, you know, we should raise the minimum wage to $30 an hour, I'd be against it. All economists would be against it. That'd really be playing with fire. That really would cost a lot of people their jobs. But a modest increase in the minimum wage, such as the current proposal to go up to about $9 an hour over a couple of years, is almost certainly, based on past experience, not going to cost a lot of people their jobs and will boost the incomes of some of the poorest of the working poor. And we could use that. That would be helpful.
I would have to say, if all of a sudden somebody making minimum wage has got a couple of extra bucks an hour in their paycheck at the end of the week, they're going to go out and spend that money. Not all of it, some of it. Maybe they'll go out to dinner one more time a week or at all, that kind of thing. I can see nothing but positive from something like that.
They will, but history and evidence suggest that they will spend almost all of it on sort of ordinary consumer goods. And that will help the economy as well as helping those poor folks.
Okay. Dr. Alan Blinder is a professor of economics and public affairs at the Princeton Department of Economics. His new book, After the Music Stopped, about the financial crisis of 2008 and beyond. Doctor, thank you so much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you.
And we hope to have you back again soon. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Do you want to get involved and help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box? You can make your contribution to Democrats for America's Future and help us keep this show going and to elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. Author Michael Grunwald recently profiled Republican Senator Marco Rubio for Time magazine. He tells us why Rubio is such a strong contender for the next GOP presidential nomination, and why it might not happen. That's coming up in just a moment. Right now, we turn to Jim Hightower, America's #1 populist, for his common sense commentary.
In a recent senatorial dust-up, Senator John McCain dubbed his Republican colleague Rand Paul one of the, quote, wacko birds in Congress. McCain, who sometimes appears not too tightly wrapped himself, was giving Senator Paul a tongue-lashing for having mounted a 13-hour old-fashioned stand-alone filibuster over the possibility that murderous drones could be used for targeted assassinations of Americans right here at home. McCain said that the Kentucky senator's talkathon had veered into, quote, the realm of the ridiculous, adding that, I don't think it is helpful to the American people. I hate to interrupt when one Republican Solon is hammering another, but I'm siding with Rand Paul. While plenty of the Tea Party senators' extreme right-wing stands are wacko, this isn't one of them. Unfortunately for America, powerful corporate interests are eager to reap billions in profit from the spread of drones across our land, and police agencies at all levels are drooling at the prospect of adding weaponized fleets of drones to their arsenals. Indeed, what's ridiculous is that other Congress critters have not been paying attention, speaking out, and taking action. Call it grandstanding if you want, but at least Paul took an actual stand. And, contrary to McCain's opinion, it was quite helpful to the American people. Thanks to Paul's attention-getting combination of principle, ego, and chutzpah, the great majority of Americans heard for the first time that these inherently invasive, liberty-busting, and potentially deadly drones are on the verge of being deployed domestically. This is Jim Hightower saying, that's why the Congressional Progressive Caucus and such alert Democrats as Senator Ron Wyden have joined in sounding the alarm and demanding a full public debate on the cost to our democracy before we let profiteers unleash this technology on us. As Senator Paul says, at least we need to know what are the rules.
Need an antidote to the progressive blues? Want some good news about how grassroots folks are rebelling against the corporate powers and winning? Well, here's an easy-to-swallow pill for you, the Hightower Lowdown. Hightower's monthly newsletter will give you the lowdown, even as it lifts you up. It's 4 pages a month, jam-packed with facts you can use, actions you can take, and Jim's own Texas humor, all for only $15 a year. To become a lowdowner, go to hightowerlowdown.org.
This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. If you're a Republican and think the party's problem is that Mitt Romney was too rich and too white, but otherwise right, then Marco Rubio is your guy. That's the view of journalist Michael Grunwald of Time magazine. If you are a Republican, by the way, welcome to the show. And joining us now on americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats, Michael Grunwald is an author and a senior national correspondent for Time magazine. His most recent book is called The New Deal, which showed that the Obama stimulus program worked quite well. Michael Grunwald, thanks for joining us again today on americasdemocrats.org.
Thanks for having me.
Hey, in February of this year, you wrote the Time magazine cover story that anointed Marco Rubio the savior of the Republican Party. So, is he going to run for president in 2016? Is he really the savior of the GOP, or did a headline writer get carried away?
Yeah, I didn't write the headline, man. Well, look, I will say this. If you're a Republican and you think that your problem in 2012 was that your standard bearer, Mitt Romney, was this super rich, entitled white guy who came from, a very wealthy background and had no connection to average people and had no appeal whatsoever to Hispanics, but otherwise had all the right ideas and all the right policies, then Marco Rubio is your guy. And in fact, a lot of Republicans do think that. I happen to think they're wrong, but Rubio essentially provides the same kind of Romney policies. He's extremely conservative. He's mostly a Tea Party guy, with the exception of immigration, which I wrote about. But he really does come from working class roots. His mom was a maid, and his dad was a bartender. He grew up in this community of immigrants. He speaks Spanish. He's got some real charisma that Romney lacked. So if you're just looking for a better politician to sell the same policies, which many Republicans are, I think you've got to assume that he's a really strong contender.
Well, Senator Rubio is certainly politically savvy to have risen so far so fast, but is he going to get hung up on issues that senators have to actually vote on, like immigration?
Well, right. That's going to be a real challenge for him. That's one reason that Barack Obama did not sit around in the Senate for years and years waiting his turn, like everybody expected him to. And it's one reason why you could see him running for president rather than sitting around having to vote on the point of order to the Third Amendment that's going to make you look like you want pedophiles in schools or something. Immigration is going to be a tough sell for him because his base, his sort of Tea Party right-wing support group, they don't think a lot of immigration reform, and that's why the story I wrote, although it has got a lot of buzz because of the Savior cover, was really sort of looking at his political and personal journey on this, because he does come from this very interesting immigrant community. And I started the story with his mom talking about and saying, hey, she calls him Tony, saying, Tony, I want you to remember, don't mess with the immigrants. They're people, human beings just like us. They came for the same reasons we did. He's balancing that kind of personal pressure with the political pressure to, kind of toe the line. And he's really trying to bring the kind of right-wing Rush Limbaugh types and Bill O'Reilly and Sean Hannity. They really killed immigration reform in 2007. And if he can kind of get them to at least step aside and get something passed, it could really make his name.
I would say he probably has more pressure from his mother than he does from anywhere else with the "don't mess with the immigrants, my son" line. So, is it possible for someone as conservative as Marco Rubio to win any significant portion of the Latino vote if he runs for president? Because typically that has not shown to be a real conservative vote.
Well, it's a good question. He got 55% of the Hispanic vote in Florida. Now, again, there's an outsized percentage of Cubans in Florida, but also a lot of Puerto Ricans. I think from the Republican perspective, they don't necessarily need to win the Hispanic vote. But Mitt Romney got a little bit less than 25% of the Hispanic vote. George W. Bush got 40%. I think they feel if a Spanish speaker with some more appeal, humble roots, that kind of practicing Catholic, that might have more appeal to get back towards 40%, then I think that would at least some of their demographic problems would go away.
Well, Again, we're speaking with Michael Grunwald, author, senior national correspondent for Time Magazine. His most recent book, The New Deal. Certainly Republicans would be interested in a young, attractive minority candidate. But let's talk about some of the other hurdles that Marco Rubio would face if he runs for president in 2016.
Well, I think you mentioned one of them is certainly in a general election, right? Republican ideas right now are not very popular, and they're getting less so every day as the demographics of the country changes. So I think this is part of what you were getting at with the question of Latinos, for example, are very, I live in Florida, and here the Spanish language ads in 2012 they were mostly about Obamacare, because Latinos really liked Obamacare. They were not so much about immigration. I do think that if immigration reform does not pass, there's the problem that Republicans will still be considered sort of hostile to Latinos in general. And then for Rubio, I think there are just, he's 41 years old, so there are certain kind of gravitas questions that are always going to swirl around, a guy who has that sort of boyish face. I happen to think he's a very smart guy, but he's extremely conservative. He'll have all kinds of bad votes, as you mentioned, against the Violence Against Women Act. He was one of the only people to vote against the fiscal cliff deal that I think had 90 senators voted yes, and he was one of the only extremists who voted no. And I think that will all be something to overcome. Plus, he does have, when he was in the Florida legislature, there were questions about how he used the party's credit card. He lived for a while with this congressman named David Rivera, who is kind of his best personal and political friend, and that guy's in all kinds of corruption problems. So if any of that ends up sticking to Marco, there could be problems there. But he is he's got a great personal story. He's a great speaker, and he's not dumb. People are trying to portray him as dumb because that silly little thing with the water, where he did kind of look like a deer in the headlights for a second. But he knows the issues. He's grown up in Republican politics, so it's not like for Mitt Romney, sort of Republican talking points were it was kind of his second language. But Rubio speaks it like a native. He doesn't have to think about this stuff. It comes to him naturally.
It's interesting that you bring that up, because that was one of the things about Mitt Romney, is that he did not speak naturally at all. He was always very stiff and very, and even with Rubio's water bottle situation, obviously the guy's an intelligent guy, but speaking about the water bottle situation, does anybody even remember or talk about what he actually said in his State of the Union response? I mean, all of the focus, and it's typical, you get this in the Twitter sphere. It all goes to that.
Right.
Does this help
right?
him or hurt him? I mean, how do you recover from that, or does everybody forget that in a couple of years?
Well, look, I mean, everybody, Bill Clinton gave that sort of famous convention speech that went on forever, and then he went on, I don't know, was it Johnny Carson or somebody, and just sort of made fun of himself. And Rubio did some similar stuff with the water bottle. I mean, I thought the speech was pretty disappointing. I mean, it was just sort of kind of same old, kind of Tea Party boilerplate. It didn't really make much of an impression aside from the little water thing. But I mean, those responses to the State of the Union, that's just like a fool's errand. I mean, you look like you're filming a hostage video. You're just, or some it's like a podcast in somebody's basement. There's just no way, the president comes on, the entire U.S. Congress stands up and applauds. It's just awful. So, like Bobby Jindal gave a lousy one. He's still considered a contender. Paul Ryan gave a pretty lame one. I don't think that really hurt his career too much. So I think, I don't think that's going to really make or break his career.
Before we let you go, Mike, what about Jeb Bush? All of a sudden now he's got a new book out. He's out on the circuit doing that whole thing. And when asked straightforward, what about 2016? Hey, I'm thinking about it, which typically means I'm going to do it.
It's a very interesting question because he's really Marco Rubio's mentor in politics. But there was that sort of interesting moment in my story where, here's Rubio kind of taking this lead role on immigration, and I knew that Jeb had a book coming out about immigration. So I asked him whether he had kind of talked to Jeb about this stuff, and he just said, I sent him a text. I was like, wow. So, and now there's been this bizarre thing where Jeb, who was always sort of, the Republican considered on the left of the immigration debate, actually moved away from a path to citizenship for undocumented immigrants, and which is actually suddenly now he's to Rubio's left after Rubio moved. He's to Rubio's right after Rubio moved left. But now then the next day after Rubio said, well, I think, we'll try to bring him back, and Jeb is kind of waffling on what he wrote in his book. So I definitely think there might be a little bit of jockeying going on between Bush and Rubio because, look, I mean, Rubio certainly spent some time in Bush's shadow, but I could certainly make the case that Rubio's a stronger presidential candidate, especially against Hillary Clinton. Do the Republicans really want another Bush-Clinton face-off? I mean, that didn't it didn't work too well for them in '92, and it's certainly the comparison of the years '93 to 2000 versus 2001 to 2008. I don't think that's really a comparison that Republicans want either. So, we'll see.
Okay. Michael Grunwald, author, a senior national correspondent for Time magazine. His book, The New Deal, which shows the Obama stimulus program actually worked quite well. Michael, as always, thank you so much for your time today on americasdemocrats.org, and we look forward to speaking with you again soon.
My pleasure.
This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Make your contribution to Democrats for America's Future to keep this show on the air and help elect stand-up Democrats. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. And now, Bill Press and his guests, Democratic Congressman Keith Ellison and Peter Welch, on the Republican budget silliness.
President Obama continuing what is called his charm offensive, coming up to Capitol Hill again today. He met with Senate Democrats on Tuesday. He met with House Republicans yesterday. Today he will meet with Senate Republicans and then with the House Democratic Caucus, two members of which have come in studio with us this morning for a little preview of the president's meeting. Peter Welch, representing the entire state of Vermont. Congressman, hey, Bill. Always good to have you with us.
Good to be here.
And here, fresh from his bout flattening Sean Hannity, Congressman Keith Ellison from Minnesota.
Good to be here, Bill.
Good to see you, Congressman.
With my buddy Pete, my classmate.
We were proud of you there, standing up for us. And Sean Hannity, you're the worst excuse for a journalist I ever saw.
Well,
did you get a lot of flack because of that? Huh?
I got a lot of reaction, both positive and negative from that.
Yeah.
So it generated some discussion, as you might have heard.
Keith is he's clear and direct, but kind of mild-mannered. So when he was doing cage wrestling there, it just was a little bit out of character. But a lot of people were pretty proud of him.
Well, it's good to see you both. You are both good friends of the program, frequent guests, and to have you both in studio is a real treat this morning. And we've got a lot to cover. Congressman Welch, you are a Catholic. What do you think of Pope Francis?
Well, you know what? I'm somewhat mildly optimistic. I mean, the church doctrines that you just mentioned, they're all very conservative, so that's not great. But you know what?
He's not going to change.
He's not going to change
women,
that.
Getting rid of celibacy.
All of which
gay
could be
marriage,
great.
same-sex marriage. No, it's not going to change.
Right. But you know what? It really seems like he lived a modest life when he gave up the cars and the limos and
the mansion.
In the mansion, and he lived modestly, and he seems to have a life that he lived dedicated to poor people. And, the church should be about that. So at least that's something that I feel pretty good about. I love that he took the name Francis.
Yeah.
And the first one, but it's a person we all associate with caring about poor people.
And Francis was, Francis of Assisi, a rich man who gave it all up and went out and walked the streets and preached lived among and preached to the poor.
Yeah. And he seems like a humble man. He's very modest, and that's refreshing.
The other thing, Congressman, your take, too.
Well, I just want to say, one of the most beautiful things about Catholicism is Catholic social teaching. It doesn't get enough attention as we're debating, all the social doctrines of, conservative social doctrines. Those things sometimes overshadow this beautiful ethic of progressive taxation, of caring for the poor, of a responsibility for each and all. And, I just hope now that we'll be able to see that side of Catholic social doctrine much more prominently displayed.
That is so right, because there's a whole wing of the church that's about social justice and conscience.
Absolutely.
As opposed to doctrine and obedience.
Peter,
let's hope.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I just want to point out there's a congregation in my district called St. Joan of Arc. Mm-hmm. And this is a Catholic congregation. And these folks are on the very front end of opposing the death penalty, standing up for the poor, making sure there's food for all, health care for all. I mean, they are always at the very front of the band when it comes to these critical social issues. And maybe Pope Francis can help make that more prominent.
I haven't checked with my sister, Maureen, who's an Ursuline nun, and was a nun on the bus. So I'll give you the final word, because she's the judge for me.
Man, you have gone up 10 notches in my belt. Your sister's a nun on the bus?
That's right.
That's awesome.
Right. Yep.
I love the nuns on the bus.
I love them nuns on the bus.
And I just want to say there are Catholics like myself who would argue, and do argue, that if the American Catholic bishops would focus more on issues of social justice and more on helping the poor and more on immigration and more on getting rid of the death penalty and less on gay marriage and abortion and those kinds of issues, the church would be a lot stronger in this country and would be keeping more people as members of the church.
Well, that's right. When I was growing
let's
up,
get back to what the Gospels are all about.
Doctrine was that's exactly right. Doctrine was one thing, but conscience is another. In a lot of the early Catholic teaching, gave respect to people who had an active conscience and came to a conclusion, and they would allow there to be different points of view when what you were doing reflected an honest reflection of your judgment and your conscience.
Can I also just give a shout out to the Jesuits?
Exactly. I do have to say now, as a Muslim, but you have a Catholic background.
Little known fact, right?
Yeah, I didn't know that until just now.
Oh yeah, man. My mother's just as Catholic as the Pope is, and there are no religious rancors going on in my household. We're all good. But, my mother's active member of Jesu Church in Detroit, which is a
and you were raised a Catholic?
Yes, I was. And I went to UAD High School, which is an all-boys Jesuit high school. And so, I know about Jesuit teachers. I mean, these guys, they don't mess around in the classroom. You got to show and prove in that environment.
Oh yeah, you got to crack.
That's where he got his disciplined mind. I waited till college before I got the Jesuit teaching. So
where'd you go?
I went to Holy Cross.
Oh yeah,
jumpstart on me there. Yeah.
All right, now let's come back home here. The president coming up to meet with the Democratic caucus today. I imagine he'll get a little better reception from you and your colleagues today than he did yesterday from the House Republican caucus. Did he waste his time meeting with that gang yesterday?
No, not at all. I mean, there's two things. Number one, he's got to look. First of all, I think he genuinely wants to see if there's common ground. And number two, politically, he's got to demonstrate that he's willing to listen to the other side. And the real challenge that we have is on the broad issue of trying to bring down the debt over the long term. There is common ground. There are things that Keith and I would support doing, like have prescription drug price negotiations, which would save $160 billion in Medicare. There's a lot of things that we could do to bring down the cost of health care, bring down spending, including in the Pentagon. So the goal of trying to get a stabilized debt situation is one that progressives and conservatives could share. The problem is that it appears that the real agenda for the Ryan budget and the Cruz budget in the Senate is essentially austerity. It's not about just stabilizing the debt. It's about crushing government.
Right.
And the approach they're taking is literally to make the middle class the piggy bank for a continuation of tax cuts and the bleeding of governmental institutions.
Yeah, Congressman Ellison. So, yes, I mean, I think the president's, I think you're right. I think he genuinely wants common ground. I hope he doesn't give too much away, but he does want looking for a solution here. But John Boehner and Mitch McConnell have both said, we are not even going to negotiate with him as long as he still wants higher revenue. So isn't that a non-starter? I mean,
well, I think you got to talk. You got to be willing to talk, and not just for optics. You got to be willing to talk because talking and negotiation is the way you might possibly arrive at some common ground. Mm-hmm. So I do support the president doing this. I think, quite frankly, I wish he'd have been doing more of it. But the bottom line is, you're not going to talk these guys. You're not going to charm them out of their very firmly held ideological positions.
But I guess is the goal that maybe he can get enough away from Boehner, in the House and
that's the goal,
to get enough votes to get a decent balanced plan passed. Huh?
Yeah, and I think it is worth trying. And here's the reality. Folks out there across America, they look at some of these positions that the Republicans hold, and they're like, well, how can you even talk to these guys? But I'm just saying, look, you got to talk to them because it's in the best interest of the American people that we arrive at some sort of fair agreement. Now, look, I'm not for the president bending over backwards and giving away the farm, but I am for him having a discussion. We should always remember, conversation is not capitulation, and so, the conversation has to go on. But it is also true that these very firmly held ideological positions that we're not going to raise any revenue, we're not going to close any loopholes, your yachts and jets are fine, your carried interest is fine, all that stuff, that they're not going to just come off that lightly, if at all. And so I commend the president for trying to talk to him, but the truth is, maybe some of this stuff's going to have to be settled at an election.
Mm-hmm. Well, I thought
it was.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Didn't we just do that?
I thought we just had an election. But if you look, I'm going to say, if you look at the Ryan budget, he was on the ticket. And yet it seems that he totally forgets that we had an election in November 2012,
it's
right?
It's pretty bad that way. That's exactly right. And they just double down on the tax cuts. They take the Pentagon out of the sequester.
Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security. I mean,
exactly.
not Social Security, but
didn't Romney say his signature issue was to repeal Obamacare?
Yeah,
and in that election had an outcome, right? It didn't.
He lost by 5 million votes.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
And so, what is the heart?
Well,
what is the heart of Paul Ryan's budget?
The heart of it's
repealing Obamacare.
That's right. Except what he does is he accepts the revenues that came from the cleanup. The $716 billion that they ran against is now a component of his budget. And now that was because it was efficiency that was proposed by the president.
So is the savings,
on Medicare.
So is the savings from getting rid of the Bush tax cuts, which he opposed, but now he takes it and makes it part of his budget. These guys have no shame, right?
They have no shame, but there's also something at the core of what they're doing, and this is what I think is not as clear to the American people. This is not just a debate about spending levels. It's a debate about whether austerity as a policy is the path to prosperity.
That's right.
And that's the fundamental belief that Paul and others have. And that's something that they believe. It's not just a tactical approach. And what their view is, that it's so different than traditional conservatives. Traditional conservatives are small government, low taxes, and personal responsibility. But that personal responsibility included building institutions to carry on values that were important. The Tea Party folks are about basically dismantling institutions because they see them as impediments to liberty. And that's what this budget fundamentally is doing. It's about austerity. You need no government. It's not about more efficient government. It's not about a government that's on the side of the middle class. It's the less is better, and that's the big debate.
Yeah, and this is a philosophy that really hasn't demonstrated any success either. We've always had a mixture of private sector, public sector involvement in order to have a successful economy.
Right.
You look back at the Eisenhower years when we built the roads that weave all over this weave all over this country. You can go back to the Civil War when the Transcontinental Railroad happened, or the Erie Canal, or all these important public investments that leveraged private investment and
that's right.
And so the bottom line is this argument that government never created a job is ridiculously false. DARPA, this is the grant program from the military, which is the government, that helped found this thing known as the internet.
Yeah.
So come on. I heard the internet started a few jobs.
Al Gore started that.
Oh, yeah, right.
I want to try to get a word in here now.
Yeah, sorry, Bill. It is your show, isn't it?
Yeah, who's he?
Bill,
just to take a little break here, but there is, it's not just the Ryan budget. There is a competing budget, a budget released by the Progressive Caucus yesterday, whose co-chair is in studio with us. I want to hear more about that, and I know you do too, when we come back.
This is the Bill Press Show.
Hey, it's 24 minutes after the hour now. Here we go. The full court press. Honored to have in studio two members of the House of Representatives, Peter Welch from Vermont and Keith Ellison from Minnesota. Are you a member of the the Progressive Caucus?
I am. I'm with my leader here.
All right, exactly. And you guys came out yesterday with your progressive budget, if you will.
Oh, yeah.
I would imagine it has a little revenue. It's not all just spending cuts.
Yeah, we got some revenue, but let me just tell you this, Bill.
Yeah, what's the big difference between you and the Ryan budget?
Well, let's start with the title
of it. Just a bit.
Yeah, it's just the title is the Back to Work budget. The Back to Work budget.
Cool.
And what you need to know about the Back to Work budget is that it's about putting Americans back to work. Other budgets, like the Ryan budget, are measured based on how much austerity they do. How much do they cut? How much they slice? Our budget is, we measure it based on how many people it puts back to work. So when we sat down with...
that's America.
But when we sat down with the folks at like EPI and some of the other economic experts that help us put it together, we said, we want to talk about how many jobs we can create. And so our budget is designed to put 7 million people back to work in the first year and get us down to full employment within 3. Well, that's what we believe what we should do. Now, here's the thing. This is like a benefit. We get $4.5 trillion in deficit reduction in 10 years because you got more people working, you got more people paying, you got more deficit going down. Now, we do go up in the early years because you got to get people back to work, but we're doing things that are necessary. So, for example, we're putting a lot of money into infrastructure development. Why? Because the civil engineers say our country needs it. The American Society of Civil Engineers says we got about $2.3 trillion in unmet infrastructure maintenance needs, and at least. And I can testify in Minnesota we had a bridge fall 5 years ago, and I'll never forget that. 13 people died, 100 people, 55 feet, severe back injuries, head injuries, and we'll never forget that. But the truth is that there are bridges that need serious repair all over the United States.
Ray LaHood says America's one big pothole.
Well, he's right. Yeah. And so we put the money into doing what we need and taking care of needs. And when we do this infrastructure development, we improve productivity. We reduce congestion. We get people moving. We get folks where they need to go. We improve the operation of energy grids and everything else. The other thing we do is we do aid to local governments because, as Pete has said, and as I firmly believe, it's wrong to shed these public employees, these everyday heroes. These are the people, cops, who run to the crime scene when all the rest of us are running from it.
Yeah.
Firefighters run into the burning building when we're trying to get out, and we're cutting these people.
We just have about 30 seconds. I know you've got to go, Congressman, but So isn't that a more important goal than just saying, oh, we're going to balance the budget?
That's right. It clearly is, and it clearly is to the American people. But we've focused on debt and deficit as though growth in expanding the middle class is not an element. In fact, the most important element to reduce the debt and deficit. People want to work. The more people work, the lower our deficit is. So that's, I think, the contrast between the Progressive Caucus budget and the Ryan budget.
Yeah, well, let the debate begin, and at least you're coming up with some new ideas, not the same old stale ideas that we saw from Paul Ryan.
That's all for americasdemocrats.org. Thank you to all who made today's show possible. Alan Blinder, Michael Grunwald, and the entire Bill Press team. And thank you for listening. If you liked what you heard, please get involved in our efforts to keep this show going and to elect Democrats who are bringing the party back to its roots. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. And be sure to find 21st Century Democrats on Facebook. For americasdemocrats.org, I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Join us, support the show, and help elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles with your contribution today. Go to America's